Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week for 30 minutes of honest advice, tips and resources. I'm here with Shah Barrett.
Hi.
Wendy Vella.
Hello.
Cheryl Phipps.
Hi there.
And today we have an awesome guest. We've got Bryan Collins here to talk to us about creativity.
Hey, Bryan.
Hi, Bryan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for having me on. I don't think I've been interviewed by this many people before, so I can answer all your questions.
Hope it's not too scary.
No. We promise we're not scary at all.
We won't bombard you, we promise.
Well, we might bombard you, but we're not scary.
Yeah.
So,
One at a time, though, right?
Yeah, well, maybe. So I'm going to read out your bio first, Bryan. See, that's going to be an example of what it's going to be like this whole interview, Bryan, just so you know. I'll read out your bio and then we'll get right on into the interview. So Bryan Collins joins the Spa today from Ireland. You might have noticed from his accent. We love our Irish guests and are super stoked to welcome him here today to talk all things creativity. Bryan is an author, host of the Become a Writer Today podcast, and a former journalist. He's been a guest writer for major publications like Lifehacker, Fast Company, and Copyblogger. He's also a former Forbes contributor. His writing online has been viewed over 10 million times. That's pretty cool. He's also the author of several best-selling books, including The Art of Writing a Non-Fiction Book, The Power of Creativity, and Yes, You Can Write. So welcome. So you sound really impressive. I've high hopes.
I didn't recognize myself when you were
Don't you love it when that happens? So let's start out right at the beginning and let's talk about how you got into writing and to where you are today. Like, let's talk about that journey towards being self-published and being the author of 6 books. Is that right?
Yeah, 5 or 6 books. It gets hard to keep track. Some books are part of a series, so I think that happens when you publish more than one.
Yeah.
So when I was like 5 or 6 years of age, I read the BFG by Roald Dahl.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I always wanted to become a writer. Something fascinating about that story. I just love the way he was able to capture the attention of, I suppose, somebody my age. So I reread the book over and over. Well, fast forward to when I was 18, I figured the best way to make a living as a writer, or the best thing I should do after school, was to study to become a journalist. So I enrolled in a journalism degree in Dublin city centre. Unfortunately, I spent 4 years going out and getting drunk and going to parties. And
We've all done that. It's okay.
Well, I was lucky to graduate, but to my surprise, but no one else's, I found it really difficult to get work after journalism college. I got a few kind of freelance gigs, but certainly not enough to pay the bills. So I found work elsewhere in social care, but I was still writing on the side. I took a series of creative writing classes in the Irish Writer Centre in Dublin. Kind of gave up on journalism, even though I was getting freelance gigs. But I started writing short stories and entering writing contests. And I said, if journalism's not going to work out, what else could I do? So I guess I spent 3 or 4 years writing trying to write literary Irish fiction. I did publish a collection of short stories or self-published them, but I kind of gradually moved more towards non-fiction as the years went by. I still enjoy writing, some fiction as a hobby, but I suppose non-fiction is kind of my main interest. Along the way, I wrote Productivity for Writers and a book about creativity writers, which I'd be happy to talk about.
Yeah. So that's cool. That's awesome. So what we're talking about today is kind of creativity, and I think there are very big similarities with non-fiction to fiction. So I'm sure that we're going to be able to use all of these things here today for anyone who's out there in the world who's feeling a little bit not creative. Hopefully, we'll be able to inspire them to get more creative and be able to think up some awesome ideas. So can you define creativity for me? What do you mean by that when you're talking about creativity?
Yeah, I always thought creativity was about having, a great flash of insight or a moment of inspiration, like Isaac Newton sitting under the tree, or, you need to tap into your inner genius or wait till you're inspired. Well, what I found out after reading a lot of biographies from creative writers and authors is that they don't wait for moments of inspiration. Instead, they turn up at their writing desk every day at a set time, whether they're feeling inspired or not. So often creativity is just about doing the work. And even if you're not feeling inspired or you don't have an idea, by turning it up, you're kind of signaling to your subconscious that you're working on something, and your subconscious will continue to work on the idea even when you're not. And the second thing I discovered is creativity is all about combining old ideas and retelling them for a new audience with your unique take. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, it's kind of like you take an old idea from maybe history or some great fiction, and you tell it for a modern audience. Don't know if Sally Rooney's quite popular in New Zealand, but she's incredibly popular here in Ireland. But she's telling contemporary stories for people who are in their late 20s and 30s about relationships, which is a classic genre, but she's retold it for a modern audience by talking about how people get together using technology and Tinder and the latest apps, which a lot of romance authors haven't done before, or literary Irish fiction authors. And you'll find that in many different types of genres or different types of writing. Like an example from nonfiction will be Ryan Holiday and Stoicism. That's a fairly old idea, but he's retold that for a modern audience, and that's worked quite well for him too.
Worked very well for him.
It has.
So that's quite neat. I mean, and you see that in fiction as well, like, retelling of fairy tales and things like that. So that's kind of a neat way to look at that. It's just taking an older idea and kind of reforming it. Even like mashups, you hear kind of like it's a mix of this versus that. That's kind of a neat idea. So.
And I love your idea about just turning up, the first part, just turning up, and your job is you're a writer, so you've got to sit down and write, and I think we sort of, we blow that a bit out of proportion. Oh, I can't write, I'm this, I'm that. But really if that's what you want to do, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me about my writing journey. So I was working as a copywriter for a British software company, kind of 9-to-5 corporate job that paid the bills. And for a while I thought, turning up meant writing for 6 hours on Saturday. But when you've got kids and you've been working all week, that's not really possible. Or a good idea. So for me, I think for many authors as well who are writing around the side of a job, turning up for me was getting up early and writing for 15 or 30 or 60 minutes. And if you do that for 4 or 5 days a week, you can stack those writing sessions on top of each other.
Yeah.
And that's how I was able to publish like hundreds of blog posts about the craft of writing, and also the self-published books that I've written over the years as well. Even today, when I'm talking to new writers, they're all about, I want to write a book, got a book inside of me, but I can't find the time to write. If you write 300 words today for your story or for your novel, and if you write 300 words tomorrow, if you do that for a week, that's over 2,000 words. And if you do that for a month, you've got 10,000 words, which is probably the first act of your book. And if you do that for 3 or 4 months, allowing for interruptions and the odd break, you have a first draft, and that's enough to send into a fiction competition or to hire an editor to help you take that first draft and get it finished.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Just getting out there and getting it started and getting that consistency, right? Turning up every day. Yeah. So what you talk, so that's creativity. Is there a process that you can what is the creative process then? So do you just sort of sit at your desk and go, I know I'm gonna pick this idea out of the air, or is there a way to kind of go about getting ideas?
Getting ready to write.
Oh yeah, I'll give you two answers. So I know a lot of your audience are particularly interested in fiction. So my favorite story about a fiction author and his process is again Roald Dahl. One day he was out in traffic and he was stuck for a story he was working on. He couldn't think of a breakthrough. And then when he was stuck in traffic, suddenly an idea came to his head. And he was like, what am I going to do? I need to write this down before I forget it. So he looked around and he had nowhere to write the idea down, no pen or no paper. So he got out of his car in traffic and wrote down a single word into the dirt on the back of his car. And that was it, which I don't recommend.
It's brilliant.
It's amazing.
I guess there was less traffic back in the 60s. But
and his car was really dirty.
and his car was covered in British mud. Yeah, so that was enough for him to remember a breakthrough for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is what he was working on at the time.
Yeah.
And for me, that was, and this is kind of a lesson learned in those creative writing classes. If you have an idea, don't assume you'll remember it when you sit down to work or write tomorrow. Just put it in your note.
Yeah.
Now I have a system that I use, which is quite good for non-fiction authors, but it can work for fiction too. It's called the Zettelkasten method. So
Did
it's
you spell that
method
out?
yeah, it's just German words. Yeah, it translates as slip box. So it's spelled out. It's Zettelkasten. Basically, it's by a German sociologist from the 60s. He used it as a way of researching his nonfiction. But what he would do is he would write down ideas on index cards, like a single idea. And then he would write down a reaction to the idea that he's come across. And then he would have one idea per index card, and he'd file them all away and interlink them. And the idea is that you're building up a personal library of your thoughts on the topic, and you're adding to it over time. So you're writing in small chunks every day. So to translate that to how that works today, if you read an interesting article online, you might save it into Evernote, and you save the clipping into Evernote and think, that's it now, I've done my research. But it's taking that one step further. It's actually summarizing the key point from the article, and then writing a reaction about what you think about the key point. And then you interlink your notes, and you can use software or you can use index cards. It works quite well for nonfiction, but I think it can work for fiction too if you're researching, a scene, or if you're going on a trip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's a few books about it on Amazon, which I'd recommend checking out. But there's a great website called zettelkasten.de. Even though it's a German URL, it's in English, and that has some great resources about the Zettelkasten method. So I definitely recommend using that.
Yeah. I like that idea of kind of writing down your reaction. That's really cool. It's kind of like not just saying this is the information, but actually how do I feel about that, or what is it that I'm reacting to? And that
I
can
think
work
it gets you to see if you actually understand a principle or a topic and how you can use it in your writing. I guess the third one, I'll give you one more that made a big impact for me was I took a masterclass by David Sedaris, the American or the humorist, and I've always liked to journal, but what I was struck by in this particular masterclass was towards the end of it, he described his journaling process, and he sits down and he writes 3 and 4 and 5 page entries every day into his journal, but he writes them up like scenes with dialogue and descriptions. So it's like it's something from a fiction short story or a fiction book. And then the idea is that he can go back and use them for his essays later on. I thought that was fantastic, because a lot of people in the journal, they just say, "Oh, I went out for dinner last night. It was terrible," or "It was great." But he writes it up like a little scene, and I think that's a fantastic practice for whatever you're writing, fiction or non-fiction.
Well, that's genius.
It would evoke all the memories of that day or that time. Whereas a sentence that I went for dinner and we had a great time doesn't really mean anything, does it?
And it's actually
go ahead.
I was going to say you're practicing writing at the same time, like you're actually practicing anyway, sorry, you go.
So I used a kind of variation of that for a new book that I've written. It's kind of a memoir about when I unexpectedly became a dad when I was 23 or 24. So I started writing down fragments of conversations from the kids and then turning them into scenes in journal entries. And then I gradually expanded them into full chapters. And then I was able to kind of weave in stories with kind of, nonfiction ideas about parenting.
Wow.
It's a superb way of getting into the habit of writing, it's not overawed. You're not overawed by starting a book, because you're starting little snow, it's great. Just
flexing the muscle every day.
And it takes away that stress of kind of like, I've got to sit down and write this thing. Becomes this kind of awesome. I love that idea. Awesome.
Yeah. That was a cool masterclass to do. Just saying, Bryan.
It was a good one. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I'm going to go do it.
He actually shows an extract from his journal in the masterclass.
Wow.
So I mean, I've journaled for years. I use pen and paper, and now these days I use Day One app. But I think it's a great habit for writers, but it's going to help me take it one step further.
That really is. Yeah, I've been journaling for, 10, 12 years now, but I haven't done anything to that degree. That's commitment.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome. So is that similar, because you talked about free writing, I've read somewhere, so is that similar to free writing, or what's free writing in terms of creativity?
Yeah, free writing is an idea I came across from Natalie Goldberg. She's a fantastic book called Writing Down the Bones. But if you're going to get it, I'd say get the audiobook, because she narrates the audiobook, and she's a really warm voice, and she's really passionate about the craft. It's a pretty old book. I think it's from the late 80s. I could be wrong. Anyway, free writing is basically when you sit down at your writing desk and you turn on Word or Google Docs or whatever you use, and you open up a blank document and you just write about whatever's on your mind for 15 or 20 minutes. And while you're free writing, your only job is to keep your hand moving. You don't stop to edit yourself. You don't stop to censor yourself. And if a dog walks into the room, barks outside, or someone walks into the room, you just write that down as well. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness exercise. And the idea is that it'll kind of force you to go in a weird and unexpected directions. I think it's a good practice for. I've used it for when I had writer's block years ago, and even again to get into the habit of writing consistently, it's quite good for that too. And sometimes you can free write a scene in your book or what you want your book to be about. So I've done that as well, and I found that's quite helpful.
Yeah, that's really cool, because that's actually something we did want to talk about. So when you had the writer's block, for example, could we talk a little bit more about that? Like, how do you have kind of techniques to kind of get back into creativity if you're feeling like you're stuck, or you're I don't know, lost?
So when I felt like I had writer's block, I had entered a series of writing contests, and I got shortlisted for a few of them for short stories, but I felt like I wasn't making any progress, and I'd been rewriting the same 6 or 7 short stories for about 3 years. So I kind of almost gave up on writing, and figured that this isn't going to work out. But what I kind of gradually discovered is that if writer's block is often an issue if you've got the wrong kind of inputs. So if you're not reading the right books, or you're not consuming the right materials that will inspire you. And often, sometimes you just need to publish your work, and this is what led me to self-publishing. Even though I wasn't getting placed in the short story contests, by self-publishing my work, I was able to get feedback online faster. Once I saw that people were actually reading it, that was enough for me to gain a little momentum to keep going. So that kind of helped me find a motivation for writing. But in terms of, I think you asked me about a specific tactic. I recommend free writing. And also, if you get noise cancelling headphones and put on like the ones I'm wearing, put on like ambient music, like rainfall or something like that. And if you can work for 15 or 20 minutes and turn off the internet, that works really well too. Because often writer's block is you tell yourself you have writer's block, but what you actually need to do is just sit down and try and do the work. And even if you only produce a couple of dozen or a couple hundred words, that's enough for the day.
Because it's a mental thing often, right? Like, writer's block is maybe you being overly critical or something like that about your own work. Do you find that, or is it for you, was that nothing to do with that?
I guess a lot of writers struggle from imposter syndrome. I know when I started publishing my work online, I was worried about what will I do if people close to me read it, like my parents or my partner or friends. But then I kind of realized that they weren't really the target audience for the type of articles that I was writing, and the types of personal essays I was writing. And not only that, but for most writers, the problem isn't what people will think of your work. It's actually getting the attention of your ideal reader in the first place. So once you get past that, once you realize that people aren't out there judging your work, they're actually pretty distracted, and you got to convince them to read your work.
There's a lot going on.
That takes you down a rabbit hole then of how do I market my writing. So.
It's a whole nother place to go.
And there's also that thing that life is so busy for everybody that we ourselves are distracted as authors, and that can really impact on your creativity, can't it? Because you were talking about turning off social media and that, and I think that's a very powerful tool, is to just to kind of shut down or shut yourself away, so that you can just have that time to reflect and to open up ideas.
Totally.
So
we're our biggest block, aren't we?
Yeah, I think
our
so.
minds. Yeah.
I think
All right.
sometimes using apps can help. You Freedom app, I think, is one that some writers use. You can disable social media for a couple of hours in the morning to get some writing done.
Yeah. There's all sorts of tricks that you can use to kind of to convince yourself. Another one that I think you talked about on your website was not allowing your first draft to be terrible. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Stephen King calls the first draft the vomit draft. Again, this is a mistake I made with fiction and nonfiction. I write the first draft and then try and rewrite it at the same time. Make sure the sentences were perfect. And then I'd read through it and then find a problem, and then it'd be like pulling on a rug, and then the whole thing would come apart. But instead, it's better just to finish the first draft, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And then when you've finished it, set it aside in the drawer. I think Stephen King has like something about write it with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. But set it aside for a few days, and then come back and edit it with a different mindset. I guess it could be a few days if it's a book chapter, but if it's an article, it could be that afternoon. It kind of really depends. But the job of the first draft basically is to exist, whereas the job of the second and the third draft is to gain readers or inspire them.
Yeah. I think that's something that when you first start out writing, you think there's a lot of myth around a writer and what they're supposed to be, and the best writers, it just comes out as perfection, and they don't understand kind of there's actually a process that the majority of them have gone through.
The first draft is like pulling teeth, really. Let's be honest. It's like
it is. Yeah, it can be particularly.
I'm into like 40 something books, and I've just finished a first draft, and I'm like, oh, thank God that's over. And now I like it again.
Yeah, I prefer editing a second and third draft.
But, me too. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in outlines. That they help me a lot. I know some writers like to see where the story goes and where the characters lead them. I guess I like to plan my writing a bit more.
Yeah, I'm like that. Wendy doesn't plan. I'm just saying.
I wish. Shares half and half. Yeah. Shares a half and half. Or I've tried everything to plot. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't work.
Wendy, I like to see a picture of it in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Everyone's different though.
Yeah, and I mean, and what inspires us is different as well. Also, like so kind of what you said earlier was that you were looking around for inspiration. You kind of needed to feel or find the inspiration to kind of help you feel more creative. Perhaps could you talk a little bit about that? Like I think that idea of kind of finding. And it's not that you don't sit down. I don't mean that you have to wait for an aha moment and don't write a thing until you get there. But like, how do you find the inspiration? Where do you start with that?
Yes, good question. So I guess I was look at past journal entries if I'm really out of ideas. So what has been on my mind over the past week or the past few weeks? Like those kind of scenes that I described, not saying to be anything like David Sedaris, right? But maybe if there was something there, like a piece of dialogue I could use, perhaps I could somehow relate it to whatever I'm writing on a particular day. So that helps me a lot. The other thing is, I mean, it can be simple stuff like just disconnecting from the internet for a little while. So I like to run. So I train for long distance races. So sometimes if I'm stuck on something, just go for a run, and then when I come back and sit down, I find getting the fresh air and sunshine. Immediately the problem I was having a few hours ago is much easier to solve. And the other thing that can help is if you leave yourself a little note before you go to bed. So if you leave it on your writing desk, something like write an introduction or write 300 words about writer's block or whatever it is, and then when you get up the following morning, you just see the note and then you sit down and you just do whatever the note says. And sometimes it'll feel easier because it's been on your mind while you were asleep.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's true.
And
or
sometimes
it wakes you up in the middle of the night and screams at you. And then you get out of bed and write it down.
And sometimes you find you're at the desk and everything, you can't figure it out and it's driving you nuts, and it's all you get all worked up, and then you go away for a while and do something physical, like you say, like go for a walk or a run or whatever. You come back and it's almost like it all falls away and suddenly it's easy again, like that's that physicality of kind of going away and doing some exercise or something different and involving your body, I think is a really awesome idea.
I don't think it's ever easy.
No, maybe not.
Maybe it's not
Maybe
supposed to be easy.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That's why there's not a whole lot of us out there.
Yeah. A lot of people want to be. Apparently something like 80 to 90% of people want to write a book, but it's it's the
Well, only a few take the time to
or that's right.
to do it, and even fewer actually finish it.
Yeah. So anyone who actually has finished a book out there, you're doing really well.
Yeah.
So you talk about the aha moment or the illumination stage of getting an idea, or that creativity stage, and it's probably while you're doing something else. And so can you talk a little bit about that, like what you've talked already about, writing it down straight away, even if it's in the dirt of your car. Is it fun? Like, I don't know.
Just for the record, I don't do that.
Is your car clean?
My car's clean. Yeah.
Totally do it in my car. It's fine. Go right the idea. Do you know what's really funny about that is Roald Dahl's one of my favorite authors too. Like, and I remember that talking about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, reading that his original idea for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was to have 25 contestants, and can you imagine how messy that would have been to write? And then he was working on it, and then he realized he had too many and put it down to 5. So it was Charlie and the other 4, and that's a big part of that book. Can you imagine him trying to wheel?
I didn't know that. Yeah, it sounds like a really difficult. Maybe that was the problem he was trying to solve.
Yeah, maybe. He wrote down 5 on the dirt.
Yeah.
Too many characters.
Yeah. Too many. Anyway, so aha moments. Can you have you had aha moments? What do you do with them? How do you create them? Like, where does it come from?
Where do they come from?
Yeah. So what I suppose describing was like the flow state. So when you're writing something and you kind of get into the zone, and if there's a way that you can recreate that, so ask yourself, like, what were the conditions for writing on that particular time, or what was the topic, or what was the type of writing project that you were working on, or how did you approach it? Basically, when all sense of time and effort fades away and you're just completely immersed, and then you look up and you're like, wow, I can't believe an hour and a half or 2 hours have gone by. That's a good sign, because that shows that you're on the right track with whatever you're doing. And if you can, try and repeat that the next day, that not only is it enjoyable, but you'll probably make a lot more progress on your book or your story.
Yeah.
I suppose in the real world, something that's less introverted, when you start getting emails from readers, that's always a good sign too.
Yeah.
I was surprised when I started getting emails from people who read one of my nonfiction books. But even today, I get emails occasionally from people who read a book I wrote 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm like, well, that book is over for me. I didn't really remember it.
I've moved on.
That is smart. How you can forget. Yeah.
I've moved on with my life, and to them, it's the same for every reader. It's immediate for you.
Yeah.
That for me would be the aha moment.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love getting in the flow. Like when you look up and 2 hours have passed and you're like, where did that go? Oh my gosh, it was because I was writing just so crazily. Yeah.
And then there's those other moments where you're not.
The rest of the day,
Yeah. That time where you're sitting there and you're just like tap, 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 tap.
The other 6 hours.
What? Yeah.
Because there's a book. I can't say his name. He's like the master of flow, Mikhail something.
Yes.
Really scary surname. What does he say?
Hard to pronounce last name.
That's
Lily. Yeah, I won't attempt it.
It begins with a C. That's
he knows who he is.
Yeah, he knows. So, and he talks about getting in the flow. I don't know, how do you get into the flow? How do you create that circumstance for you, or is that different for everyone?
Yeah, I guess it's different for everyone, but I can tell you what I would do. So I try and get up and keep a kind of consistent routine. So after the kids are gone to school, get a set of noise cancelling headphones, and I listen to like ambient music or rainfall on Spotify or YouTube. And I'd set a timer for 30 minutes, and I just work on one particular section of whatever the book chapter is or the article. And then with the 30 minutes go, lapses, I go down and get a cup of tea and then try again for another 30 minutes and just repeat that for 3 or 4 times. I used to gamify it a little bit. I used to try and keep track of all the 30-minute blocks, but haven't been doing that lately. But I find sometimes that can work for me because it tricks me into trying to beat my score the following day.
Yeah.
So that's that helps me kind of get into the flow state. I mean, to be honest, I think the key thing is just to have some quiet time and place with no distractions where you can work. That often helps. So it can be hard if you've got small kids or work, but getting up in the morning can work too, or early in the morning.
Do you ever leave the house? Do you ever leave the house and go to another environment, or do you always work at home?
I've done that sometimes. Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, it wasn't really possible. So I've kind of fallen out of the habit of that. But like everyone, I go to the coffee shop. I like writing in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
That's probably the main place I go. I've gone to a library as well, but I kind of prefer the coffee shop. Maybe just the background noise.
I agree. Coffee shops are great.
Once you get used to it, there's something quite special about that noise, I think.
And you don't log on to their Wi-Fi or their internet connections. You stay off that and you just write. Then that's what you do.
Yeah, just get a large pot of tea.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing that you've talked about is having a personal mission statement. And I find that quite intriguing, and it's something they've done in business world, but you did it for yourself in your writing career. So could you talk a little bit about the background of that and how you came to do it and how we could do it for us?
Yeah, so sorry, my daughter's just here. I'm just gonna tell her I'll be finished in a minute. Maybe I'll be finished in a minute, okay? About 10 minutes, okay? Yeah. So my daughter walked into the room. It's late here as well.
It's all right. We've had that. Pets, children. It's all good.
How old is she?
Yeah,
is she?
She's 11. I was going to say 10.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Don't sell it short.
So you're asking about the personal mission statement.
Yeah.
So before I started become a writer today, I was kind of questioning whether I should write at all anymore. I was kind of reading a lot of personal development books, like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and a couple of career books as well, because I needed to get a job to pay the bills. So a lot of them described having some sort of mission statement or personal mission statement, and it acts like a North Star and gives you, something to work towards. First, I thought the concept was kind of cheesy, not really something that I would do, but it involved writing something 300 or 400 words, so I figured I'd give it a go. I was out of work, I was unemployed, couldn't have got worse. So I wrote a personal mission statement, and then I found it quite maybe therapeutic, but then I kind of refined it a little bit and said I should try and find work to do with creativity and writing, and there's other stuff in as well about my family and health and fitness. There's only 300 or 400 words, but I found it gave me a little bit more direction, because suddenly I was applying for specific types of jobs and saying no to other types of jobs. And it also led me towards setting up Become a Writer Today, which accidentally turned into a business a year or two later on the side as well. So even now, I would still have a kind of a mission statement that I would look at for the business and for creative work. It would just kind of say, these are the books that I'm going to write over the next few years, or these are the types of stories that I'd like to tell. Or this is the type of work I'd like to do. So I find that's helpful. I guess it's kind of, when you're working on a book, it can seem all consuming, but like you can step back and where does the book fit into your entire career as a writer or as a creative? And that's where your kind of personal mission statement fits in, gives you a bit of purpose and direction.
Because if you don't know where you're heading, you're not going to, you can go anywhere. Whereas if you kind of have an idea of where you're going, you're more likely to get there, right? Like,
Exactly. So, I mean, are you going to write genre fiction? Are you going to write books and then have courses that complement your books? Are you going to write books because you want to do public speaking gigs? Are you writing books because it's something you want to do? It's a lifelong passion, or you just want to do it because it's a once-off thing in your bucket list. So a mission statement can kind of help with all of that.
Is it something that you relook at every year? Like, do you have an annual kind of planning, goal setting thing as part of that, or is it just something you set as you feel it, and it just carries on until you're ready to change it, kind of thing?
Yeah, I do. So I do have a kind of review that I do. I used to do it every year, kind of like a big annual review. But what I kind of learned from talking to a few people who did something similar is a year is quite a long time.
Mm.
You can set a goal, you can set a goal, and then, you know, you can feel like that's ages away and then you don't work on it. Or you try to do too much in a year. But what is more realistic, I think, is if you just look at seasons. So what do I want to do this season?
Mm.
And that's long enough to get something done, like a first draft, but not so long that it's ages away. So you have to get to work. And you can always change direction if by February or March, you're like, oh, I don't like this direction that I'm going in. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've not hit your goals for the year. It's just you're changing direction for writing or for your business or whatever you're doing. So yeah, basically like around February or March and June or July, and I guess around now, I kind of look at what creative project do I want to do for the next few months? What do I want to spend time on? What went well over the past few months? What would I like to do more or less of? And yeah, so that's kind of what the process would look like at the moment.
Nice.
Yeah. Do you find that there's sort of a couple of levels? That's what it feels like to me. There's this kind of overarching thing that you said, I want to work in creativity and writing, versus saying, I'm going to finish this book in the next, I'm going to work on the book in this next 3 months. Like, do you, or is it just the same thing in your mind? Like it's just different challenges as you go along?
Oh, definitely different levels. That's a great way to describe it. So like I think Stephen Covey says something in his book about levels as well. He describes it as the 50,000 feet view and the 10,000 feet view and the 500 feet view or something like that. It's been a while since I've read it, but basically different levels. So like the mission statement is when you're looking at the next few years, and then the quarterly or the seasonal plan is when you're looking at the next few months. And then when it's Sunday evening or Friday evening, you're looking at just next week, what you're going to do next week.
I really like the idea of doing it by seasons. Quarters sounds kind of businessy, and it kind of it is obviously, and it doesn't sound creative, but seasons, I love that idea, I really like that.
I guess too, doing it so often during the year, it gives you a chance to reflect on what you have achieved, and if you are meeting your goals, I think that's quite good.
Refreshing.
It does.
Yeah.
Sorry, just someone's going here. I'm just going to move the camera for 1 second. Go ahead.
All good.
This is real people. This is live.
We're nearly just about to wrap things up anyway. Yeah.
But so one couple more. Well, actually, one main question is: so do you have any other books? I mean, you've got your book, so we can talk about that in a minute. But other books on creativity or gaining
that
flow,
inspired you.
that
have inspired you that you could maybe mention for our audience?
Oh wow, that's a good question. So many. It really depends. It changes from day to day. But I guess Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon is quite good for the idea that ideas aren't original. If you're looking for an older book about what it's like to just be a writer for a full-time career, the Journals of John Cheever are worth checking out.
Okay.
So he gets into all his personal problems, but it's a really good book. It's fantastic. I'd also say anything by Joan Didion is good too. I think she's a master at the art of personal essays, so I found them particularly good.
Okay, that's awesome.
And then in terms of the craft itself, Story by Robert McKee. That book had a big influence on me, as it had on many people. And I was lucky enough to go to a conference by him a few years ago, and
wow,
I met him, and he autographed my copy of his book.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome. Did you go to one of his story conferences? That's
the one, yeah. He was in Ireland in Killarney. So it was great to hear him talk. He got very passionate about storytelling on stage. And then I said to him, I think at the time, you asked about writer's block earlier, but I was like, well, how do I know what to write? And then he said, just write what you love to read. So I thought that was good advice.
That is awesome advice.
Brilliant advice.
Love it.
And so you've got a book on creativity as well that you've got out there. So what's that one called?
Yeah, so my book on creativity is called The Power of Creativity. It's a 3-part series. First part is available for free on Amazon if you want to go and check it out. If you just type in The Power of Creativity, it should come up.
Okay. And that is around just being creative and kind of.
It's kind of like the ideas we've talked about here. So I talk about when I was blocked and how I used the mission statement. And then I talk about how other creative people have overcome times when they felt blocked, and then like Roald Dahl. And then I talk about the importance of having like a writing system or a system for your creative work. And then I kind of the other books in the series kind of get more into creative work as it applies to your business, or to building a creative business.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Thank you.
Very cool.
For that.
Yeah.
And so is there one piece of advice that you would like to give our listeners on creativity or overcoming writer's block, or something that you think that will help them continue
One
on?
final kernel of
gold.
Brilliance.
Gold here. No.
No pressure.
Yeah,
No
If
pressure.
you're listening, then you're watching, and you feel like you're blocked or you don't know what to do, just turn up and do the work for 15 or 30 minutes and do that consistently, and the answers will reveal themselves through your work. It might be not the ones you're looking for, but
That's true.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us here. So if someone wants to check you out, find out more about you or your books, where do they go?
oh, thanks, Trudy. So if they visit Become a Writer Today, you'll see on the homepage you can get a free book of writing prompts, 101 writing prompts. And you can also, look for the podcast, Become a Writer Today on iTunes, and I interview authors about their writing processes. And I'd love if you could check out the podcast as well. I think you might get some practical
Very
advice.
cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We'll
Thank you
make
very
sure
much.
those links are in our show notes. If
Yeah.
you're listening to this on your podcast app, it'll be in the show notes and also on our website, of course, and
Awesome.
social media.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Shah, where can we be found?
Well, you can go and look at our show notes at spargirlspodcast.com.
Awesome.
That was nice and short.
Yep.
So thank you all. Thank you, Bryan, for talking with us here today. That was really awesome. I'm feeling inspired.
Yes.
And thank you to our listeners for listening to us for another episode of the Spa Girls podcast. We'll be back again next week. But for now, fare thee well.
Keep
Bye.
well. Bye.